Okay, everybody. Today we have a distinguished film critic. I think our first film critic. I don't think I interviewed a film critic on here before. He wrote this fantastic book, Black Caesar and Foxy Cleopatras, the history of Blaxploitation cinema. I can't read. It was so much. I'm like, what is this? This is a fantastic book because I love Blaxploitation films and just Black cinema in general. So, Mr. Henderson, how are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor to speak to you today and to talk about my book, Black Caesars and Foxy Cleopatras, A History of Blaxploitation Cinema. And if I knew I had to say it as many times as I have said it, I would have opted for a shorter title.
It's a good title, though.
I think it's a great title.
It's a great title. Before we begin, we have something in common. You, sir, as a young man, worked at a video store, and I, in my college years, worked at a video store. And my favorite part of the day is when I lock up and I have to go back to the adult section and tell people, "Hey, you guys got to go," because people don't seem to want to leave. You got to get out. And it's always curious. You see people walk in. And then because we have a camera, and then they kind of walk in. Oh, do you have Ghostbusters? And then they kind of slowly make their way to the other room.
Yeah, we know what you really want, Busters. What Busters you want to see? The people at my video store were a lot more shameless. The issue wasn't so much that they were going in. The issue was that a lot of teenagers, and I would have certainly done this myself, would try to sneak in. And so we had saloon doors. I mean, it really looked salacious. Like, the only thing that could have been better is we had beads, like from the 70s, covering the video. So we had saloon doors. So you always knew when someone went in because they made noise. That was the other reason why we had them, because they made noise. So I would see a kid come in. The next thing I hear the saloon doors, and I got to go get them out of there. You can't be in here,
Yeah, but I forgot about it. We didn't have the beads. We just had a curtain. And, we would be, because we still had to do our jobs. People were buying CDs and stuff like that. And then we would look over it. It's like, what happened to that kid? And they say, hey, get out of there. Too young. It's like the side clear says 18 and over. But, like I said, kids would try anything.
And then we had some very famous titles. And people would come in and they would just, again, no shame. Do you have, Robo-Ho? That was one of the titles, Robo-Ho. One of my favorite titles. And can you hold a copy of Wet Dream on Elm Street for me? Like, sure. I am not a kink shamer. And then the worst was they would always ask me, is the chick on the box in the movie? Like, I sit here and watch porn all day. Like, I don't know. She's probably not. Knowing what I know about porn, she's probably not in the movie.
Yeah, I didn't get that at all.
I didn't get that at all. People, brothers came in our store and were like, you know what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's crazy. Okay, good that I was in Ohio.
But then one of the things they came in for was Blaxploitation movies, which is what we had. That was what kept the store open. We had Blaxploitation movies. We had Kung Fu, all the Wu-Tang Clan movies that they talk about in their songs. We had Cantinflas, who was the Mexican Jerry Lewis. He was in Around the World in 80 Days. We had a lot of his movies. I had never heard of him until I worked in the store. And we had porn. Of course, we had the regular titles, but most people went to the Blockbuster or someplace for a regular title. They came to our stuff for the stuff that Blockbuster didn't rent. And one of the big things, we had a very big Blaxploitation section. And a lot of people came in to rent those movies because if you were a kid like I was, either you saw them, an adult took you to them that wasn't supposed to, which was my case, or you saw them on television where they were chopped up. And now that you had videos, the great thing about VHS was that all the movies I saw on TV that were cut, I could now go rent them and see what was missing. And a lot of our things in the store, movies they would show on Channel 9 here in New York, but it'd be cut, like 3 to Hard would be cut. So now you could see it in all its glory.
Right. Well, that's a good segue into your book. You said something that I never thought I would agree with, but it made a lot of sense. No, it was good. I never thought I would see Citizen Kane and Superfly in the same sentence. But you're correct. Superfly is Citizen Kane on Blaxploitation films.
It is. And the reason why I chose those words, because I tried to have a good title for each chapter. something to make you want to read the chapter and see what it was about. But the reason why I chose that is because, I don't think Citizen Kane is the greatest movie of all time, even though the Sight and Sound poll did it for many years. It's actually number 7 on my Sight and Sound ballot. But it is a movie that is extremely well constructed and is known for it being well constructed, well written, well acted, well directed, and shot. And it had a history. And so Superfly, being the Citizen Kane of Blaxploitation, one of the reasons why I called it that was only because I think it's the best made of the Blaxploitation movies, but also, more importantly, it's the reason why Blaxploitation is called Blaxploitation. Because until Superfly, Blaxploitation didn't have that name. Junius Griffin, the head of the Beverly Hills NAACP, which I still can't believe there was a Beverly Hills NAACP in 1972, but there was. He coined the term Blaxploitation, which is black and exploitation put together. Exploitation, the suffix, it wasn't just Blaxploitation. There was a whole list of movie subgenres at the time that had exploitation as a suffix. You had Blaxploitation, Hicksploitation, movies like Smokey and the Bandit and The White Line Fever. You had Hagsploitation, which is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and all those movies they made where the older female stars would, camp out. And you had Nazi-sploitation, Nunsploitation, you had Bruce-sploitation. When Bruce Lee died, there were all these movies about clones of Bruce Lee, including a movie called The Clones of Bruce Lee. So exploitation became a suffix, and all Junius Griffin did was he put black in front of it. So that's how Blaxploitation became known as the name for this era / genre. But it was because of Superfly. That was when he coined it. Superfly came out in June of 72. And in August of 72 was when Junius Griffin coined that term. So Citizen Kane being a movie that, launched a whole bunch of other types of films where the so-called auteur, the writer, director, and so on, made these movies. So Superfly did something similar.
You did a really good job. You didn't go directly into the Blaxploitation films. You kind of talked about all the black cinema that led up to it. And there was an interesting thing. You were talking about Sidney Poitier and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And then you also talk about Melvin Van Peebles. And the only thing I can get in my head was the image of Melvin Van Peebles being like De Niro and Cape Fear, just working out, look at that film saying, I want to create, it's nothing against Sidney, but he said, I have to change this dynamic. Let's talk about the yin and the yang between Sidney Poitier and Melvin Van Peebles, that cross from Sidney Poitier movies to Melvin, and then which kicked off the Blaxploitation era in some ways.
Well, Sidney, in 1967, Sidney Poitier was the #1 box office draw. It was the first time a black star ever did that, because really, how many black stars were in Hollywood besides Sidney at that moment that could command a lead role in the film? He had 3 movies in 67, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, as you mentioned, To Serve With Love, and The Heat of the Night, which won Best Picture of 67. And meanwhile, while that's happening, Melvin Van Peebles is in Paris. He wanted to make movies because he was sick of seeing some of the earlier movies of black people in them. So he went to Paris, and in France, if you wrote your own novel, the French government would pay to help you make your film. So Melvin Van Peebles, who did not speak French, he went to Paris. He learned French. He wrote 3 books in French. Then he made a movie adaptation of one of his books, which is A Story of a 3-Day Pass. I believe that's 1967 as well. So that's happening. Sidney Poitier took a percentage of the gross of To Serve With Love. He didn't take any money. I think he took $3,000, and then he took 10% of the gross, which turned out to be something like $43 million in 2024 money. So Sidney basically could stop making movies at that point because he was loaded. In fact, he went back to the Bahamas after some of his other movies flopped, like Brother John. And when he came back, we were in the middle of Blaxploitation kind of coming up. Melvin had done Watermelon Man. He was the 3rd black person to be asked to direct the film. Of course, Gordon Parks is the first. He did The Learning Tree. He wrote it. He directed it. It was his book. He adapted it. He was the producer of it. He wrote the score for it. So he actually had as much power as Orson Welles did when Orson Welles made Citizen Kane. Then, of course, Gordon Parks made Shaft. Before that, Melvin made Watermelon Man, and Ossie Davis, the fourth Black person to be asked to direct the film, made Cotton Comes to Harlem, which is kind of what most people believe is the beginning of Blaxploitation, the first Blaxploitation film. And so Melvin is doing this. Now he's doing Sweet Sweetback, and Sidney's coming back, and he's taking control of his career. He directs Buck and the Preacher, and he starts making movies, I will say this, for us, for Black people, because before that, he was making movies representing us on the big screen, which is why he had to be noble and all that nonsense. But now that there were more Black people on the screen and they were directing films, he could play a fool. He could act a fool. He could do Uptown Saturday Night. He could do a comedy. He could be silly. He could be petty. He could be horny. He couldn't do that in 1963. So Sidney kind of did this kind of transformation into something, a Black director who had control of his image and made himself blacker. And Melvin went in a similar direction, although he made Sweet Sweetback, which is his answer to all of these undersexed, no mustache having Black people in cinema before this. So that's the difference between the two of them. The odd thing about Melvin is that as much as he hated the, coonery and whatever else was going on with, Mantan Moreland and Willie Best, he cast Mantan Moreland in Watermelon Man. And I was always curious about that. And in the book, I explained Melvin's answer to why he cast him. But so Melvin, Sidney kind of came over to our side at the same time that Melvin was coming into his ascendancy as an independent director who made, for a time, the most successful independent film ever made.
Right. I'm always fascinated by Roger Corman's system that he set up when he gave young filmmakers like Scorsese and De Palma. Not De Palma, I'm not sure.
Coppola.
Scorsese, Coppola.
Everybody worked for Roger Corman. Carl Franklin.
Yeah, Carl Franklin. But I did not know that he was also responsible for Pam Grier for her acting career. I didn't, because usually you just hear the say Coppola, Nicholson, all this stuff, but I didn't know Pam Grier was part, and she wasn't even trying to be an actress. He just said, "Hey, you want to be in the film?"
Well, she was working at AIP, American International Pictures, which is where Corman started. By this point, Corman had left AIP and started New World Pictures, his own productions company. And Pam Grier was there, and the guy that was Richard Roundtree's agent saw her in a beauty pageant and said, "Hey, you should be in movies, and we're looking for someone to go to the Philippines and make this, what they used to call Chicks in Chains movies, women's prison pictures." And so Pam, being part Filipino, she went to the Philippines and made 3 movies for Roger Corman. She made the first 2 things she did for Jack Hill, The Big Dollhouse and The Big Birdcage, and she made Women in Cages in between that. So Roger Corman kind of kicked off her career, but it was American International Pictures that put her in the stratosphere with Jack Hill, who directed, I mentioned, the first A Big Dollhouse and Big Birdcage. He also directed Coffy for AIP. That was when Pam Grier's star blew up. That was when she became Pam Grier with, capital P, capital G. I'm over the title. I don't die in a movie, and I'm a badass. That's when she became that. Before that, she was doing supporting roles where she was playing a tough person, a tough, woman in these movies. So he did actually pretty much kick off her career. Roger Corman kicked off a lot of people's careers: Jonathan Demme, John Sayles, like I said, Carl Franklin. We're going to talk about Black folks. And the funny thing, when I interviewed John Sayles not too long ago, he said, Roger Corman's system was that he made money before the movie, a foot of the film was even shot. His movies were profitable before that because he gave you $500,000, which was the going rate for a Blaxploitation movie back then, by the way. And if you went over if your movie cost $500,000 and $100, that $100 came out of your pocket. It didn't come out of Roger. So that's why he was he always made money. He only lost money on one film, which is his best movie, The Intruder, where William Shatner plays a KKK member. And if you don't think William Shatner can act, you should see this movie. It was the only movie that Corman made that lost money.
Man, when we look back at films like a Shaft and Spook Who Sat by the Door, they're cult classics. They're revered. People love them. But when they both came out, they were not well received, especially with Shaft.
Well, Shaft was
kind of black bourgeois. Yeah.
Well, Shaft was well received, and it saved MGM.
From the critics. I meant from the critics.
Oh well, I mean,
was it?
Well, Superfly got some of the best critical reviews. Shaft was kind of panned by a lot of critics, but some critics did like it. Vincent Canby, the critic of the New York Times, he liked it. Roger Ebert gave it a mildly negative review. But yeah, Shaft saved MGM, and that was what really made him start making black movies. It was because once Hollywood realized, hey, these black folks can actually get us out of the red, we'll start making these films. So, and also Shaft, was up for 2 Oscars. It was edited by the first black person to get an Oscar nomination for editing, Hugh Robertson, who edited Midnight Cowboy, which has 0 black people in it. But The Spook Who Sat by the Door, I'm glad you brought it up, because what happened with The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which really did get very, very bad reviews when it came out, was that the government freaked out and they pulled it. It was hidden for years. Tim Reed, the comedian who did Frank's Place, he was the person who kind of forced them to bring it back and restore it. And thankfully, Ivan Dixon, who directed Spook Who Sat by the Door, which is edited by Michael Kahn, Spielberg's editor, he was alive to see his movie get a resurgence. But Sam Greenlee, he was really a CIA agent. He was the first black CIA agent, just like in the book. He wrote the book. It was basically a manifesto for how black folks could take over the government and start, a revolutionary war. And that's what scared the government, because the movie basically ends with black folks taking over. And it scared the crap out of them, so they yanked the movie.
That's something. Julian, I know from the Mac, but I didn't know that he also wrote Cleopatra Jones.
Yeah, Max Julian wrote Cleopatra Jones. He also wrote Thomasine and Bushrod. But the Mac is what he's most famous for as an actor. He didn't write the Mac. The Mac was written, technically, this shooting script is by Richard Pryor. But it was written, the name of the screenwriter escapes me, and I'm sorry, screenwriter. He wrote it when he was in jail on toilet paper. And the last shooting script, Richard Pryor did a brush up on it, because Richard Pryor was a writer in addition to being a comedian and everything else that he was. And he's in the Mac. And the Mac, it was shot, guerrilla style. And it was financed or kind of backed up by an actual pimp, by Frank Ward. And it's a fascinating, time capsule. Well, these movies are time capsules of the urban environment in which they were shot. Shaft and Comes to Harlem, Superfly, and those other things are snapshots of New York, and Uptight is a snapshot of the Huff in Cleveland. And there's all these ones for LA that are, snapshots of Cleopatra Jones and so on. Snapshots of what it was like in the hood in that particular period of time. So those things are fascinating to kind of look at. As like I said, as a time capsule for them. But the Mac, it introduced that great coat, his great outfit. Remember his outfit, his white outfit, and it played up the player's ball, and it put Oakland on the map. A lot of those places in the Mac, if you go to Oakland, some of them are still there. And Oakland, really takes pride in the fact that they were a part of this historical, document.
Speaking of Richard Pryor, he is almost like the secret weapon for a lot of these films. And I don't think it started off that way, but it's almost like a Forrest Gump type, because he was in Watch Stacks, he was in Lady Sings the Blues, he was in Car Wash, he was in Uptown Saturday. It's kind of like, if you need a jump or a space in a film, put Richard in it. How important was Richard? Even though I don't think people associate him with all these films, how important was he to 70s cinema? Just for him popping up in all these in a role.
Well, he became kind of the new, kind of what Sydney was showing up in all those movies back in the 50s and 60s. And Richard Pryor kind of came into being, number one, he came into his own as a comedian in about 72 or 73 when he put out those albums that won him the Grammy. And he did Watch Stacks, and he did Dynamite Chicken before that, 2 years before that. So he was kind of a counterculture, like George Carlin, like Lenny Bruce, kind of comedian who would show up. And since he was working for Stax Records, that's why he's in Watch Stacks. But he was in Lady Sings the Blues, right, because that was his life. He grew up in a whorehouse. Diana Ross said she taught her how to shoot up for her shooting up scenes. He deserved an Oscar nomination for playing the Piano Man. He was damn good in that. And then, that kind of kicked off his career. but they never really knew how to use him. Michael Schultz in Which Way Is Up and Car Wash knew how to use Pryor. And some of the other movies like The Mac knew how to use him. And Uptown Saturday Night, the funny thing is that his part was supposed to be played by Bill Cosby. It was supposed to be Red Fox and Richard Pryor were supposed to be the leads of Uptown Saturday Night.
Wow.
And they said neither Red Fox nor Richard Pryor were white famous. So they cast Sidney and Bill, and they put Richard Pryor. Sidney said, "I'm bringing Richard Pryor and put him in, as Sharp Eye Washington." That was the name of his character. And he comes in, he's in the movie for 5 minutes, runs off with the damn movie.
That's amazing.
So Rich was around. Yeah, Rich was around, and he brought cred, if you will, to some of these films.
That's interesting, because I heard of United Artists, but I never heard of First Artists. So Uptown Saturday Night is produced by First Artists. Yes. And it's a production company. It's a production company with Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, and Barbara Streisand. Mm-hmm. How did that come about?
And Redford.
Because I never heard of it. Yeah.
Newman, Redford, Barbara Streisand, Sidney Poitier, and for a time, Dustin Hoffman.
How did that even come about? And how come it didn't last? That's.
You remember United Artists initially was Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford and a bunch of stars who got together and wanted to produce their own films. Same thing happened here. You had people that were either big, enormous celebrities on film like Newman and Redford, or known commodities like Sidney, or someone who was a big recording star who had obviously won an Oscar for Funny Girl, but wanted to get into her own movies. Excuse me. And they all got together and they joined up and they produced several movies, big movies that And I don't know why it disbanded. I guess people just went their own separate ways. But for a time, it was, that was a powerhouse set of people making those films.
Yeah, that's right. There's a film that I never heard before. There's quite a few films I never heard before. Ganja and Hess. And it, I think you said before Do the Right Thing and before Car Wash, because they both appeared, they both were at Cannes, at the Cannes Film Festival. Ganja and Hess was also at Cannes. Yeah. What is Ganja and Hess? And do you know how it ended up at Cannes back then?
Well, okay, so Ganja and Hess is directed by Bill Gunn. Bill Gunn is a very famous and his story is very sad. Bill Gunn knew James Dean. He went to school with James Dean. He was an actor. He was one of the first Black people to write a novel about white people. He wrote a play about white people that got produced. He wrote The Landlord. He adapted The Landlord, the Hal Ashby film. He adapted The Angel of Vine, the Bernard Malamud story with Harry Belafonte and Zero Mostel. He was a writer. He was the second Black person to direct the film. I remember I was saying before that you had Gordon Parks the first, and then I said Melvin Van Peebles is the third. People always ask, well, there's a hole because they assume Melvin was second and Ozzy was third, but there wasn't. Bill Gunn made a movie called Stop. It was for Warner Brothers, 1969. He shot it. It was an X-rated film, X like in Midnight Cowboy, not like in Deep Throat. And it was Owen Roizman, the guy who shot The Exorcist and The French Connection. It was his first job as a cinematographer. You cannot see this film. Warner's pulled it. It never got released at all. And that happened to everything that Bill Gunn tried to direct. Ganja and Hess is the next movie he directed, and they went to Cannes, and it was, celebrated at Cannes, and it didn't make any money. And then the production company cut it up. And Bill Gunn had a fit. Like he went to the producer's office and basically wrecked it. And when I got to Ganja and Hess at the video store, it wasn't called Ganja and Hess, it was called Blood Couple. And it had been re-edited by the studio and butchered. So you didn't get to see Ganja and Hess in its original format unless you were at Cannes or at the Penthouse Theater when it opened in 1973 here in New York. You didn't see the whole movie until they did the restoration of it. Now, Bill Gunn was long dead by the time this happened. And his last project was something called Personal Problems, which I wrote about, which is actually very, very good as a TV show, if you will. And they just basically kept everything he did as a director, they took from him and butchered. And there was no explanation as to why Warner Brothers never released Stop. I had to get an illegal copy of it to see it. And it looked like trash. So someone like Owen Roizman, who has 5 Oscar nominations for cinematography, we will never see his debut the way that he shot it. And we'll never see the second movie directed by a Black person. But we don't know. Warner Brothers pulled it. You can't see it.
That's crazy.
So Ganja was his second movie. Yeah.
That's a crazy story. Okay, so I know Blackula. I know Scream, Blackula, Scream. I've seen those. I heard of Blackenstein, never seen Blackenstein. Didn't know there was a Blaxploitation. Yeah, I know there was a Blaxploitation werewolf movie.
The Beast Must Die.
Yeah, it has the greatest tagline. It was the question is who is the murderer? The question is who is the werewolf?
And they actually had a gimmick, the werewolf break, where the movie stopped for 30 seconds and you in the audience had to guess who the werewolf was. And it gave you all these clues. And I tell you in the book that Beast Must Die has the first black werewolf ever. But that's not the spoiler. I mean, the first black werewolf was actually bitten by the actual werewolf. So she's not the first werewolf. She's not the werewolf in the werewolf break. But that was Kevin Lockett had done that, who was obviously Biggie Smalls in Uptown and Let's Do It Again, and Silky Slim in Uptown Saturday Night. He was in that. He was the star of that. With his full Bahamian accent in that movie, because he and Sydney came from the islands, and it's a fun movie. I like it, but I never remember who the werewolf is. And then, of course, lest we forget my cup here, we have Abby, the Black Exorcist.
I don't even know Abby the Black Exorcist.
Oh, there's a reason why you don't know Abby the Black Exorcist, because Warner Brothers, those bastards, here we go again talking about Warner Brothers, they pulled Abby. They sued AIP and said Abby was too close to The Exorcist because there were all these Exorcist knockoffs.
Yeah. Right.
One of them, the one that's close to The Exorcist, is called Beyond the Door. They sued the makers of that too. Carol Speed, who was Abby, she wrote a book about Black Hollywood in 1980 when she got out of acting called Inside Black Hollywood, and she didn't even know that Warner Brothers had sued AIP because Abby, in a week, Abby made $9 million at the box office. This is back when tickets cost $1.50. $9 million in 10 days. And that's when we got on Warner Brothers' radar, and Warner Brothers said, you can't do it. And they pulled it. And the rumor is they burned every print of Abby. Now, Abby got a video release. We had it in the video store. And you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. But it doesn't look good. It looks, like it was recorded off of a 60 millimeter print. It's like crap. But Warner Brothers, they pulled it, which is really strange because, as I say in the book, the devil has the patent on possession, not Warner Brothers. So why are they suing? And also, Abby isn't that close to The Exorcist. It's close enough, but it's not close enough where you can sue and say it's plagiarism. So Warner Brothers pulled it. That's why it's hard to see Abby, but it is on YouTube, and please watch it. William Marshall, a.k.a. Blackula, he plays The Exorcist. So come to get the devil out of Abby.
Who do you think is the most underrated actor during that Blaxploitation period?
Oh, I'm going to say somebody that's going to get me in trouble. I'm going to say Fred Williamson. And it's funny because I would never have thought that when I started writing this book. When I went through all those movies, now Fred Williamson, he took over his own career like Sidney did and started writing and directing movies. A lot of them were Westerns because Westerns are cheap. He did Adios Amigo with Richard Pryor. He did Take a Hard Ride for the second of his 3 collaborations with Jim Kelly and Jim Brown. And he directed a lot of his movies, but he was a very versatile actor. And he was a football player, lest we forget, like a lot of these people were. He's Black Caesar, so he's playing a gangster. He's playing that man Bolt. He's playing a Bond character in that man Bolt. He's playing different types of Western characters in those movies that have the N-word in them, N-word Charlie, the soul of N-word Charlie, and the legend of N-word Charlie. He's doing like a little bit of comedy and Take a Hard Ride. And I was surprised at his versatility because I never really thought of him as, an actor. I thought of him as a presence, obviously. And I mean, as a kid, I looked up to his characters. I never really thought he was an actor. And then going through this, I was stunned by his versatility.
You have a Pam Grier shirt on, and you mentioned in the book how you felt. Yes, you mentioned how you thought that Coffy was a better movie than Foxy Brown, but Foxy Brown was more influential. What made Coffy better than Foxy Brown? What made Foxy Brown more influential?
Well, Foxy Brown was originally supposed to be a sequel to Coffy. It's supposed to be called, believe it or not, Burn, Coffy, Burn. And at the last minute, AIP didn't want a sequel, so Jack Hill had to kind of scramble to rewrite Coffy, rewrite Foxy Brown, because that's why Foxy Brown doesn't have a job in the movie. That's because she was supposed to be a nurse like Coffy. Coffy was influential because after Coffy and Cleopatra Jones, women could kick ass in the movie. Before that, they could only do it in Roger Corman films. But now they could do it anytime. Not just white women, black women could kick ass in the movie. And Pam Grier made sure that happened, and so did Tamara Dobson with Cleopatra Jones. The reason why Foxy Brown was more influential because, number one, it made more money. Number two, you have Foxy Brown, the rapper. Number three, you have Jackie Brown. Quentin Tarantino went back, got Pam because he loved Foxy Brown so much. He loved Coffy so much too. He loved Pam in general. He went back and he got her, and he put her on the screen in Jackie Brown, even with the same font for the credits that Foxy Brown has at the beginning of the movie. So I think that's why I said it was more influential, simply because people will look at Jackie Brown and think Foxy Brown. And then also, this is the beginning of Pam Grier being a fashion clothes horse. I mean, she's dressed great in all of her movies, but from Foxy Brown, then especially Friday Foster, was when they really started to deck her out and really just have her wear all her outfits, that she wants. And in Friday Foster doesn't get dragged through the mud or anything like that, like she does in the other Coffy or Foxy Brown. But that was when they really started putting her in. And Foxy Brown's opening is her in every outfit she wears in the movie, dancing around. So, that's why I think it's more influential, because it's also proof that she wasn't the fluke, that Coffy wasn't the fluke. She opened Foxy Brown and it made even more money.
Yeah. You mentioned for Sweet Back, Melvin Van Peebles set a precedent where the black hero lives at the end, right?
Yes.
And that can be good or bad. Like sometimes you watch some of these films, like, okay, he should have been dead by now. However, yeah. But I will say the film, I never put in the Blaxploitation category, but the film that always gets me for killing off a hero speak, is Cooley High.
Yes.
And I didn't feel that way again until like Boys in the Hood, where you're just, and maybe because Cooley High was more relatable because they were just regular kids in high school. But can we talk about Cooley High and the impact it had on this legacy? Yeah.
Well, Boys in the Hood is a remake of Cooley High. So Cooley High, I saw Cooley High on the saddest double feature I've ever seen in my life. That and Cornbread Earl and Me, which had Lawrence Fishburne's debut. It wasn't Apocalypse Now, folks. It was Cornbread Earl and Me. Two movies where black characters are cut down in their prime. And in Cooley High, which was Eric Monty, who created Good Times, as you know, with Michael Evans, who gave his name to the Evans family. He also actually created the Jeffersons, because he created Louise and George. Because on All in the Family, Lionel, aka Michael Evans, was the only person on for the Jeffersons family on All in the Family. And he and Eric Monty wrote a script introducing Louise and George. And that's how they got on All in the Family. Now, Eric Monty went to Cooley High. Cooley High really exists. It's a school in Chicago. It's a VOTEC, as we used to call it when I was growing up, a vocational high school. And it really did exist. And Eric Monty went there. And this was his recollection. It was the first time you had a black person do a film like American Graffiti, where you are seeing them talk about their life growing up, what it was like to be that person in the 60s. Now, I talked to Michael Schultz about this film because he directed it. And, the movie's full of Motown songs. I mean, it's chock full of Motown songs. And it introduced It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday to everybody, long before Boyz II Men, which is why Boyz II Men's album is called what? Cooley High Harmony. So I asked him, because again, AIP made Cooley High. They gave $500,000. He had Garrett Morris from Saturday Night Live, who played a teacher who actually was a teacher in a school like Cooley High and had to audition and fight for the part, despite the fact that he was playing a character he was real life. I asked Michael Schultz, how much did it cost for all those Motown songs? Because, rights for songs are expensive. That's why a lot of movies had to change their soundtracks when they went on DVD, because they couldn't afford the music rights. And he said it was the cheapest part. Back then, nobody gave a damn about Motown. So they were able to get the money. And then he said it cost $5,000. It's like 14 Motown songs in Cooley High. Do you know how much that would cost now if you tried to get 14 Motown songs in a movie? So I was surprised by that the fact that nobody gave a damn about Motown, you could buy their songs literally for a song. But Cooley High, it spoke to me because I saw these. I mean, I saw it. I was a kid, but when I got a little older and I recollected and remembered it, it felt like my teenage years. Even though I didn't go to a Votech, but those kids, I knew those kids. And then, of course, lest we forget, What's Happening is technically Cooley High on television. They had to change the names at the last minute, but if you ever watch What's Happening, at the end of the credits, check, it says based on Cooley High. They had to put a credit there for it. So, and I talked to Glenn Turman, too, who was 30 when he made that movie. He does not look 30.
Wow. He looked like he was like 18 years old.
He looked like he and Ralph Macchio, because Ralph Macchio was also 30 when he made The Karate Kid. They look like kids. More often than not, it's usually the high school kids look like my mother, like 40,
right.
in these movies. But he was 30. He looked 17.
Wow.
I love Cooley High. It's a great movie, and I really think it's a movie that really showed that you could make a dramatic film that Black people would come out to see and would feel.
You have a list of your top 10 Blaxploitation songs. I was going to talk about that, but then I skipped ahead and I was looking at Sparkle, and how Curtis Mayfield didn't get paid a lot of money for the Superfly soundtrack. Now you would think, because that soundtrack was huge, you would think Curtis Mayfield would have been rolling in the dough, but he got screwed over from Warner Brothers over that soundtrack. How is that even possible?
Well, I mean, not just for Superfly. Now, Superfly, the soundtrack, made more money than Superfly the movie, by the way. And Superfly the soundtrack was, Melvin Van Peebles doesn't get credit for this. He's the one who kicked off the idea of having a soundtrack tie into your film, and the soundtrack would come out before the movie and be marketing for the film. But Melvin couldn't sing, so those songs as we sweep back, despite the fact they're by Earth, Wind, and Fire, they sound terrible. And his Watermelon Man songs sound terrible too. But Melvin, he got 2 Tony nominations out of a kazoo. He wrote his songs on kazoo, and he wrote 2 Tony nominated musicals. But Superfly that album, like I said, one went in the movie, and Curtis got screwed. But then it gets worse, because after he made Superfly, the soundtrack, he did Claudine, which is my favorite non-Superfly Curtis soundtrack. He did Sparkle, as you mentioned. He did Let's Do It Again. He did Piece of the Action. He did Short Eyes. Now, remember, Curtis has a record label. He's producing people. He's doing all of this stuff, writing all these songs. And as with most Black people, the rights and things, you get screwed up on them. So Short Eyes is the first time Curtis really was like, wait a minute, hold on, time out here. I'm being screwed by the record company. My accountant is running off my money. I got to take control of my songs. So Short Eyes is the first time that Curtis, I think, got paid what he was worth for writing, his soundtracks. These are some of the greatest music soundtracks. Without Superfly, there's no Saturday Night Fever. There's no Grease. There's no Flashdance soundtracks.
You talk about being underrated. I think one of the most underrated directors ever is Michael Schultz. Just for his influence and his contribution to cinema, and also because I don't know if Al Pacino's worked with any Black directors when he's been making movies, but he worked with Michael Schultz on Broadway, and that's how Pacino won his Tony. He won a Tony. Yeah. Can we talk about the leg Michael Schultz and his importance to cinema, not just Blaxploitation, but just everything?
I originally wanted to write a book on Michael Schultz. This book started out years ago as a book on Michael Schultz. I wanted to write about Michael Schultz because he is fascinating. Because he directed, again, he did Al Pacino, Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie, which Al Pacino won the Tony for, in 1969. He directed Sam Jackson's first movie, 1971. When Sam Jackson is older than you think. People always forget, but Sam is old. And he's been around a while. He directed Denzel's first movie, Carbon Copy. He did all of those movies at Run DMC, Crush Groove. He did Disorderlies. He directed Which Way Is Up and Car Wash. He was supposed to direct Grease, but he couldn't because he was working on Which Way Is Up. So they gave him Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He was the director. He directed things that Black people didn't direct. He directed episodes of The Rockford Files. He directed episodes of TV. His TV history is even more fascinating than his movie history. He directed the pilot of Miami Vice. Michael Schultz did. And for a time, he was the only Black director working in Hollywood. I think he said something to the effect of, Spike Lee started the new wave, but for a time, I was the whole ocean. So, and I got to meet Michael Schultz twice, and I got to talk to him. And he's he's still alive. He's a fascinating man to talk to. But his history, someone's got to write a book about him. I guess it's going to have to be me. But he's fascinating. So I can't say enough about Michael Schultz. He's made some movies that I think are, but, so everybody's done that. But in terms of history and importance and underrated, he is definitely near the top.
So let's go to someone that we both admire, to someone who kind of put the death knell in Blaxploitation, Joel Schumacher. I am not
it's not Joel Schumacher's
fan
fault.
of. I know. It's a whole thing. It's not just him because he wrote the screenplay for The Wiz. I was never a big fan of The Wiz movie because it scared me as a kid. Yeah, I was because the look of the film always scared me. Like the whole premise and the Broadway show, amazing. But I was so scared by the look of it. But I want to thank that whole crew who put that together, because if that film was a hit, Michael Jackson probably would have kept on making movies. And we wouldn't have got Off the Wall, and we wouldn't have got Thriller. So thank you guys for making The Wiz as poorly as you made it, because we would have got these two tremendous albums. So thank you.
Let's talk about The Wiz. And let's talk about The Wiz in general, because The Wiz is coming back to Broadway this month. The Wiz is the first thing I ever saw on Broadway. It scared the hell out of me. And this is long before Joel Schumacher added the one thing to The Wiz that made the movie a classic. He set The Wiz in New York, because The Wiz on Broadway, she was still in Kansas, and she went to Oz. Because the Black people were in Kansas, Gordon Parks grew up in Kansas. And so when The Wiz is being made, you had Sidney Lumet, who was his mother-in-law was some famous woman named Lena Horne. He put Lena Horne back on the screen. He was married to Lena Horne's daughter. Ginny Lumet, who is his daughter, is Lena Horne's granddaughter. He put Lena Horne back on the screen. Remember, Lena Horne's not on the screen anymore. She's gone. Hollywood did her so dirty, but that's another story. The problem with The Wiz was twofold. And I love The Wiz for all of its problems because I grew up with it. But you're right, it's scary. The garbage cans eating Michael Jackson's arms. And I have a friend who knows that certain things terrifying about The Wiz. That little noise, that little thing that Quincy Jones, who did the score for The Wiz, a little noise that it makes when the garbage cans are coming and the guy's got the puppet and the puppet grows. Now, even to this day, that scares me. And I'm a grown man. Mm-hmm. So The Wiz was terrifying, as The Wizard of Oz was terrifying to a lot of those white kids back in the 30s. So, back then it was okay to scare kids. The problem with The Wiz is twofold. One, Sidney Lumet, the best person to direct The Wiz should have been Michael Schultz. That would have been perfect. But Sidney Lumet, he even says in his book, Making Movies, which is behind me on this bookshelf, that he was the wrong person to make it because that's not the kind of movie he makes. He doesn't do musicals. He made 12 Angry Men, he made Sarah he made Dog Day Afternoon, classic movies. But, this wasn't his jam. It went $18 million over budget. That was the other thing that killed it, because they were like, you Negroes, you all cost too much money. We can't do this anymore. But the other problem, and I'm getting in a lot of trouble for this, is Diana Ross. Now, I love Diana Ross, don't get me wrong, but she was too damn old. And even if she weren't 33, she's Diana Ross. So there's no way you're going to believe she's some innocent school teacher who had never been south of 125th Street, as the line that Joel Schumacher wrote for her in that movie says. So she was too old. But, even so, she sang the hell out of the score. And she and Michael Jackson have such chemistry in that film that if Michael Jackson had gone and had a cinematic career, he and Diana Ross would have been a great couple. They could have been like Billy Dee and Diana, maybe not romantically, but just as friends, that type of thing. Right. So in The Wiz, I went to Kaufman Studios in New York, which is where they shot The Wiz, which has a museum in front of it called the Museum of Moving Image, and they had pieces from The Wiz, Tony Walton got an Oscar nomination for the costume design and the production design of The Wiz. And then, with the Yellow Brick Road was tile, was linoleum, as my mother used to call it when I was a kid. You could buy the Yellow Brick Road linoleum and put it on your floor in your house. I said that's the most ratchet ghetto thing I could ever think of. But I would have had a Yellow Brick Road in my house. It made money, but it didn't make enough money. How the Wiz is like My Cousin Vinny and a bunch of other movies I could think of that had a life after it got out of the movie theater. Like A Christmas Story is probably the greatest example of this. Christmas Story was a flop when it came out, but it's on TV for 24 hours every Christmas Eve now, right? It went on VHS. We talk about our video store experiences, and it became a phenomenon. And that's what happened to The Wiz. But that didn't help 1978. So The Wiz was the biggest budgeted black movie made at the time. I think you have to go to Malcolm X to find the next movie black movie that costs as much money as The Wiz. And remember, Spike had to go and beg people for money to finish that film.
So that's 1978. So let's go back to 70. What was about 1973? Because it seems like there was a Blaxploitation film coming out every week.
Oh yeah.
What was it about that 1973 period?
Well, yeah, it's the honeymoon period. Like you say, you go into a relationship, you have the honeymoon period, and then everything's great, and that's what happened. So Superfly made more money than The Godfather one week in August of 72. Superfly was the number one movie. And a lot of these movies are debuting at number one. And the Hollywood still didn't get through their head that there were enough black people to go to the movies and enough white people interested in this type of thing to see these films. So 73 was kind of the proving ground for Blaxploitation. You have Coffy, you have Cleopatra Jones, you have the Mac. And so these movies are coming at That Man Bolt, which was supposed to be a 3-picture deal with Fred Williamson. He only made one movie. It was supposed to be his answer to Bond. Even Bond got involved in 73 and made Live and Let Die, which is technically a Blaxploitation Bond movie, a bad one, but nevertheless. So 73 was kind of the proving ground. They're like, holy crap, Superfly made all this money. Now we need a Superfly every week because Hollywood, as Melvin says, and I quote him in my book, Hollywood has an Achilles pocketbook. And so if something makes money, they make 57 million other ones. So Superfly made a lot of money, and they started making all these movies. And that's why 73 was full of them. And 74 too. And then Jaws came out.
That changed everything. Jaws and then followed by Star Wars. They changed everything. Mm-hmm. What do you think of the underrated Blaxploitation film?
I love Sugar Hill, which I got to show at midnight at the Coolidge in Boston. Sugar Hill turns 50 this year. It is a horror film. It is a zombie horror movie with voodoo, with Baron Samedi, who was played by Nasty Nelson, a.k.a. Jeffrey Holder, in Live and Let Die. It's played by Don Pedro Corley in this film. Sugar Hill is played by Marky Bay. She is a woman who runs a club, and her husband is beaten to death, and she wants revenge. So she goes to her voodoo roots, and she goes to Mother Jefferson from the Jeffersons, is the voodoo priestess in this film. And she summons Baron Samedi, who is so famous in voodoo lore that people just saw him and they knew they were screwed. That's how, he's Dr. Facilier in Princess and the Frog. He's got the top hat, he's got the white makeup, the skull makeup. He's usually practically naked. He's dancing around, he's got his cane. He is one of the most, recognized figures in lore. And so he shows up, and these zombies that are very low budget but look really, really creepy exact their revenge for Sugar Hill. And now a black woman conjuring up the spirits of black ancestors to get her revenge is a fascinating idea. And granted, it's an exploitation movie, so it's full of, salacious details and naughty things, but I found it to be a fantastic idea. And also, this is before the Jeffersons. So Zara Cully, people don't realize, and I read about her very briefly in the book, but another fascinating black person whose history is swept under the rug. She was one of the most famous black theatrical people. She had a theater. She wrote plays. She was in them. She taught actors how to speak. She was famous for her elocution. Because, on the Jeffersons, she's always drunk. But even so, that regal voice coming out of her. And she was 82 when she was on the Jeffersons. So she had a 50-year career before the Jeffersons, and nobody knows about her. And that's the thing that irritates me, because when I was writing this book, and even after I was writing this book, people ask questions like, why am I even bringing up this history? Because some of it is salacious, some of it is stereotypical, and is bad. Some of it is, but it's our history. And when you sweep our history under the rug, you lose things. Like James Baskett was Uncle Remus in Song in the South. And people have problems with Song in the South, and rightfully so. But he is one, the first actor Walt Disney ever hired. Number two, he is the first black actor to get an Oscar. First black man to get an Oscar. He couldn't come to pick it up because the Oscars were in Atlanta that year. But nevertheless, he was. And nobody knows this. All they know is that he's Uncle Remus. And a Song in the South should be banned. Because if you hide our history, good and bad, you never know about the good things that people did, in addition to some of the more, nastier stuff you might not want to hear about. So that's why I'm all for no censorship of anything. And people think that I just basically am like jumping for joy in every Blaxploitation movie in this book, and I'm not. I'm taking, a very serious look at some of the things that I think are bad about some of these movies. But I also talk about what I think is great about them and what is historically great about them, regardless of what people think that they're, outdated or stereotypical. I think that that's the problem that we have a lot of the times, is that we don't give credit to the people who Spike Lee and everybody else gets to stand on their shoulders to do it. When Monique got her Oscar, she said, I want to thank Hattie McDaniel because she went through all the stuff I didn't have to go through to make this, to get my Oscar. And people, it's like shaming some of these actors or some of the history. I'm not down with that at all. You can talk about that as bad. You have two thoughts in your head, that Mammy is, a stereotypical character. You can also say that Hattie McDaniel played the hell out of that part and deserved the Oscar. And in 1939, she was the first black person to get one. And how long was it before they got another black Oscar winner? 1964.
I think. Oh, 64. Oh, yeah.
Sidney got nominated for Defiant Ones in 58. But he won in 64 for Lilies of the Field. The sister actor.
Was that his only? That was his only Oscar, right?
Yeah. Well, he got an honorary Oscar the same night that Denzel got his Oscar for Training Day.
Yeah.
So that's his
second
Oscar.
Denzel, like Denzel. He went Denzel. Denzel like deserves like four or five Oscars.
Well, Denzel losing for Malcolm X is one of the biggest, dumbest things Oscars has ever done. That he lost for Malcolm X is insane.
It is insane. But you mentioned Sidney Lumet. That goes back to Pacino. Pacino should have won for Serpico or Dog's Day Afternoon. It's almost like they said, "Oh, yeah." It's just yeah.
It's the We Owe You Oscar. It's the We Owe You Oscar. It happened to Paul Newman. He got for Color Money. One of his worst performances, in my opinion. The Pacino, several things he could have gotten nominated, won the Oscar for either Godfather, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, as you said. I mean, I think that's what. I mean, Nicholson got his Oscar that year. I think Nicholson should have got his Oscar 2 years earlier, and Pacino should have gotten it for Dog Day Afternoon. And they gave it to him because they had to, because they owed him that Oscar. That's why he beat Denzel. And I guarantee you that Pacino would say Denzel was better in Malcolm X than he was in Scent of a Woman.
Yeah, and the same thing happened to Angela Bassett recently, like last year. Like, the Oscars are so frustrating.
They're fun, but they're frustrating.
They're right. They are frustrating. They are the most frustrating award. The Grammys and the Oscars are the most frustrating because it's almost like they try to outwit everybody. It's like, no, just give it to the people who actually deserve.
I think the Grammys are worse. I think the Grammys are 10 times worse than the Oscars because there's more Grammy awards for starters.
Well, yeah, I have my whole Taylor Swift thing. There's no way should be the top all time. Beyonce. That's a whole different. Yeah, Beyonce. It doesn't make any sense. Like, she breaks the record of Sinatra and Stevie Wonder. Speaking of Stevie, was Stevie ever asked to do a soundtrack or no?
No. Well, yes and no. Stevie Wonder, and I mentioned this in the book, and this hurt my heart. Stevie Wonder wrote a musical. And Motown was going to make it. Remember, Motown had gotten into the movie business with Ladies is the Blues. And they were going to make it, and never got made. But no, he was the only. Motown became the de facto label for Blaxploitation movies that were not written by Curtis Mayfield, who had his own record label. And so Motown did, the Foxy Brown, they did Trouble Man, which I think the biggest Motown star to do a Blaxploitation soundtrack is Melvin Gaye for Trouble Man. I think that's it. Stevie, none of the other Motown people, Smokey, none of them did Blaxploitation movies because they were busy trying to write like the Wiz type kind of musicals that were kind of beyond Blaxploitation, and none of those things ever got made. But no, I would have loved to have seen the Stevie Wonder musical.
All right, I got two quick final questions.
Heyday. We're talking songs in the Key of Life era, Stevie Wonder.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like you see all these soundtracks with James Brown and Willie Hutch and Curtis Mayfield, and you think Stevie was the biggest cat at that time. Him, Al Green, kind of like Donny Hathaway, and you would think that Stevie would have done one of these, but I was like, oh, he never did one. So
well, Hathaway did do one. Donny Hathaway did do a Blaxploitation. He did come back called Charleston Blue.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but no, Stevie was so busy working on those albums he kept winning all those Grammys for, they didn't really have much time to do soundtracks. His first soundtrack, of course, is Secret Life of Plants. Right. Which is bonkers. I don't know, but Stevie was smoking something when he wrote that.
I think after the Sauce of Key of Life, I think Stevie is like, the stuff that I just taught, all my ideas I thought were crazy, I'm just going to do this on this album because he just put his heart and soul into that thing.
So after that, he was like, I need to make songs about plants having sex and liking titties. I mean, that's Secret Life of Plants. I saw it. It was one of my white whales of movies I wanted to see my entire life because I had that album. My parents said, "What the hell is this album that Stevie Wonder put out?" Because it's very avant-garde. His album, "Sin When You Love," the song is the only I'll say normal, not as bad thing song on that album because Stevie went like psychedelic. He was smoking some good weed. I can't say he was or not, but allegedly. But the Secret Life of Plants is a documentary, and a documentary they were proving that plants like breasts. That was one of the big things that you learn in the Secret Life of Plants. Big breasts, tickle bitties, plants like them. And then you got Stevie Wonder writing a soundtrack about this.
I think I'm going to buy a plant after. I'm going to start buying plants to figure out.
Well, Stevie's best soundtrack, of course, is Jungle Fever. There's no doubt in my mind, and that is one of Stevie's greatest albums is the Jungle Fever soundtrack.
All right.
No nominations. Oscars making you mad. No Oscar nominations for Jungle Fever for the soundtrack.
Well, Public Enemy didn't win for Fight the Power, and
I don't think it could have been nominated because it wasn't the since it was a sample. I don't think it'd be nominated. But do you think Hollywood would have nominated that back in '89? I mean, they got Eminem and they got 3 6 Mafia later, but in '89, oh hell no.
No. People seem to forget like they were scared of Spike back then.
Well, remember that he had that famous Esquire thing that I mentioned in the book, and I mentioned when I wrote about Spike. I've written about Spike in Sydney probably more than any two people I've ever written about. I think I've written about them two more than any other actor or director that I've written about. Maybe Billy Wilder. Spike Lee had that famous Esquire thing. Spike Lee hates your cracker ass, and he didn't say that in his Esquire interview, but they put that he was the angry black man of his time, and Spike being a provocateur kind of leaned into that, for a little while. I got to be on stage with Spike. We did the 20th anniversary of Do the Right Thing at Ebert Fest, and that was actually pretty cool to actually be on stage doing the Q&A with Spike and with Chaz Ebert and Michael Phillips back in 2014. Because I love Do the Right Thing. Malcolm X is, I think, his masterpiece, but Do the Right Thing certainly is number 2. It's my number 5 movie on my Sight and Sound list of best movies of all time. And, I went to see it, obviously, in '89. And all these critics here in New York were saying that a lot of similar things they were saying about Blaxploitation movies. So it's really weird how things are cyclical. That it was going to cause riots and it was bad for black people. And, I went to the movies thinking it's a revolution. And it was not a damn thing happened. And I was mad.
No, nothing happened. It was just people, because I think when you see Do the Right Thing and you leave the theater, you were just stunned by what you saw. It's almost like you felt a little bit angry, but you're just like, wow, like that was
you were stunned, like you were
just soaking, stunned.
Yeah, and which is Spike's intention, and it's it's great that I was offended that all these white critics didn't think that I knew the difference between a movie and real life. And I was like, trust me, this movie is not going to make black people riot against white people. Racism is going to do that. And that's been around for a lot longer than Did the Right Thing.
I just started on this by Spike. I'm thinking about Robert Townsend and Keenan and Eddie Murphy. I'm thinking about them being kids during that Blaxploitation era. Mm-hmm. And when I see Eddie, when you see maybe Let's Do It Again, which you see that in Harlem Nights, you see that in Coming to America, and then Keenan and Robert, you see that in Hollywood Shuffle, you see that in I'm going to Get You Sucker. Yeah, the next generation, because I always feel like because the Wiz kind of ended things,
and the black people disappeared off the screen unless you're Richard Pryor.
Right. Yeah, it was just Richard, and I think people kind of just Spike and Robert kicking things off, but I kind of go to Eddie. Like it was like when 48 Hours, there was like the culture shift at that point to me. Like, because naturally I would say, oh yeah, Spike and Keenan and Robert, yeah, but I kind of go to Eddie. Like Eddie said, oh no, black people can still make a lot of money if you just trust the talent.
Well, you're missing somebody, because now Eddie comes out in 82. He does 48 Hours because Eddie's on Saturday Night Live. He's been on since 80, so it's 82. He does 48 Hours, and then remember, Trading Places is supposed to be Richard Pryor and Dan Aykroyd. It wasn't supposed to be Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. It's supposed to be Richard Pryor, and so Eddie Murphy is doing movies that I will say are for a general audience, not for black people. It wasn't until he did Coming to America that he made a black movie. Think about it. At the same time this is happening, Michael Schultz, our pal, is doing these. There's a whole underground, and I call them, I compare them to Andy Hardy movies, which drives people crazy. But back in the 30s, you had Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney doing all these movies where let's put on a show and sing all these songs. And in the 80s, in the early days of rap, you had Breakin', you had Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, the greatest title ever movie ever. You had Beat Street, and then you had Kush Groove and Disorderly, these movies that were made by Michael Schultz. The last two movies were made by Michael Schultz. This whole little underground of little black musicals that became like the next little era of underground black movies, like Blaxploitation started out as. That's happening in between Eddie and Spike's New Wave in 86. People tend to forget that little section there where there were all these little movies for teenagers like me who were into hip-hop, into the culture at the time, and it was in its origin. And they made those movies for us. And they were little low budget, almost like the Beach Party movies or Andy Hardy movies, like I said. And they were a movie for teenagers, for little black teenage kids. And people tend to forget that era exists. Now, Michael Schultz was kind of doing The Last Dragon. How can I forget The Last Dragon? These movies were keeping black people on the screen in a low budget, underground way, like the origins of Blaxploitation were doing. So I mean, it was Richard Pryor doing the toy, but
yeah, we choose to forget that film, even though it's like technically it was like him and Jackie Gleason. So technically, you think about Jackie Gleason come up super swinging the band, and you kind of feel like okay, but the whole premise was just horrible.
The toy could have worked because the toy is a remake. It is a remake of a French film that has the same plot, except the character is not black. The character is poor, but he's not black. Jackie Gleason came to play. He came to play that he played the hell out of that racist, and Richard Pryor came to play too. But they were afraid to let the movie be a farce like the French one was. So it wound up being very, very said. In fact, by them toning it down, made it more racist. If they had made it like absolutely absurd like the original film, it would have been so stupid and ridiculous that you wouldn't have kind of thought about, hey, Jackie Gleason basically bought a slave. Because the movie makes you think that because it's too slow and it's too nice. And so you start thinking about these things. And that's what makes the movie fail. You can make him. Roger Ebert says it's not what a movie's about; it's how it's about it. I think it's important. Look at something like "Sorry to Bother You," or some of the other black satires that we have, like Get Out. And those movies are stretched to a point where the satire makes it so you don't think about the realism of the situation. You think about what is going on in this. So it takes you away from the reality for a second, but at the same time, it's making the reality more hyper real. Whereas the toy was just tame. I mean, we need an R-rated Richard Pryor in the toy. That's what we would have made that movie work. But, Pryor, again, Hollywood didn't know what to do. He made a movie called Some Kind of Hero that they butchered, him and Margot Kidder. It's based on the book. It's a fascinating. I would love to see the director's cut of this film because apparently Richard Pryor kicked ass in this movie. Then he made Jojo Dancer, which is his 8.5, his All That Jazz, which he directed. And that's a fantastic film. And again, a rare instance of a black person looking at their life at that time. This is 86 when he made that film. And so Pryor, and he can act. He's in Hit with Billy Dee Williams, the movie that people forget that he made in 73. He's fantastic in that. He was a damn good dramatic actor. He was an Emmy-winning writer. He wrote one of the writers of Blazing Saddles. Pryor was fascinating. His life was so sad, but he's one of the most fascinating and one of the biggest black geniuses, not just black geniuses, period, ever. And, he doesn't, I don't think he gets his flowers sometimes as much as he should. And I think that if Hollywood knew what to do with him, he would have been bigger than Eddie, bigger than, some of the big, like Kevin Hart and these other people who are far worse, in my opinion, cinematic presences than Richard Pryor was.
Yeah, they're not even. Hart's not even. I'm a bigger fan of Kevin Hart of the other things that he does outside of films. It's not. I'm not knocking him. It's just when you see like a talent like Richard, like that's what a comedic actor is like. And Hart, fine, he's working in his era, but it's not even close. Speaking about
Hart is Hart. He doesn't. I mean, Hart is Hart. He's written about that last night, and he's good in a couple of other films. He's great in that movie with The Rock, Central Intelligence. But he's still always playing Kevin Hart. Like if you look at the Bingo Long Travel, North Stars, and Murder Kings, which Richard Pryor is in, and which Spielberg was supposed to direct, by the way. He's damn good. Him, James Earl Jones, and Billy Dee Williams in a baseball movie. Another movie that I wanted to make sure I mentioned in the book that people sleep on. It was a movie that John Badham directed before he made Saturday Night Fever. Pryor is not Pryor in that movie. I mean, he's Pryor, obviously. We know he's Richard Pryor, but he's playing a character, and you believe his character. It's the Grease Lightning, another Blaxploitation era movie.
Oh yeah, like that's the crazy thing. Like Richard, I think people pay attention to the concept films and the crazy stuff. But plus, there was that Union movie. I can't remember the name. The Union movie that he was
Blue Collar, which is a masterpiece.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. But because it's scary too. Because it's almost like if you talk or you try to change things, this was going to happen to you. It's a very
And Pryor, it was a flop because they marketed it as a comedy, which it most certainly is not. And Pryor is so damn good in that movie. His rage, the rage that's in his comedy, comes out so much in that film. And my pops made cars. He was a member of the UAW. And they took me to see Blue Collar when it came out. I saw it at the drive-in. I remember my pops talking to my mother about the machinery. And the one thing that bothered him was that Yaphet Kotto's character gets killed. That he said that Yaphet Kotto's character would never have done what he does in this movie. You just don't do that on the line. Because, it would kill you, which is what happened to Yaphet Kotto. But that was his only complaint. He said the movie felt like, that was what it was like to work in the audio industry. And he was working in the audio industry at the same time this movie came out in 78. But again, Pryor, no Oscar nomination. Not even a thought of how great that movie is. And for years, you couldn't even see it.
Yeah. Speaking about giving someone their flowers, listen, you have a Pam Grier shirt on. We love Pam Grier. She is iconic. But can we give some love to Tamara Dobson, the lovely Tamara Dobson?
Absolutely. And she held the Guinness Book of World record for a while. You know what she held the record for? She was the tallest woman in movies. In action.
How tall is she?
Cleopatra Jones's tagline tells you 6'2" and all of it dynamite.
Woo-hoo-hoo. That's nice.
Tamara Dobson and Pam Grier were neighbors. They had been neighbors since 1969. When Cleopatra Jones, which made $30 million at the box office, came out, and they $3 million at the box office, sorry. And Cleopatra and Coffy made $2 million because it was rated R, so less tickets. They were both seen as celebrities. And so Pam Grier wrote a screenplay for her and Tamara Dobson because they were friends. These two big black women. It was going to be like a Thelma and Louise heist film. Pam Grier wrote the screenplay. No studio would make it. So Tamara Dobson, after Cleopatra Jones and the Casino of Gold, came out, she did a lot of television stuff. She was in Chained Heat. When the reemergence of Chicks and Chains movies came out in the 80s, she was in that. And she'd done a lot of television, and she was around for a while. She went to modeling and did stage work, but she didn't get her props like Pam Grier got. Can you imagine what would have happened? It would have been the first time that two women, black or otherwise, had been in a film where they were buddies and they were in the heist kind of thing, a Bonnie and Clyde kind of thing. This would have been the first time this happened. We're talking 1973, 74. You got two women who made movies that made an ungodly amount of money, and because they were black, Hollywood would not produce this screenplay. And I said, I want to pause several times in the book. I say, let's just stop and mourn something that never came to be. And that was one of the things that I said, let's stop and mourn. I would have killed to see Tamara Dobson and Pam Grier in a movie together. You know how much money that would have made? Now, every little black kid from the hood would have come out to see it 8 times and paid 4 times to see it.
That would have been amazing. And like you said, this is before Thelma and Louise. This is before Set It Off. Like it would have been an amazing film.
Changed. So many things would have changed black Hollywood history that never came to be or came to be later. Like Set It Off, which I love. I love that movie. I love Set It Off.
Right. Yeah, it's a great movie.
Yeah.
I'll end it on this. I'll end it on something funny. We'll talk about another woman. Chuck Turner is a very entertaining film with Isaac Hayes.
I love Chuck Turner.
But you said, I think you said in the book, the reason it got this R rating is because of Nichelle Nichols.
Yes.
Lieutenant Uhuru.
Lieutenant Uhuru.
Can you explain?
Yeah. I did Nichelle Nichols tribute at RogerEbert.com. And I'm on brand. If nothing else, I'm consistent. I didn't lead with Lieutenant Uhuru. I led with Chuck Turner. I said, you know what? Y'all know who she's on Star Trek. I'm going to talk about Dorinda, the character she plays in Chuck Turner. Now, Isaac Hayes wanted to be Shaft. He couldn't be Shaft because Isaac Hayes really can't act. But he played Shaft on the soundtrack, and that's what got him his Oscar. Jerry Reed did the same thing. He wanted to be Smokey and Smokey. He wanted to be the Bandit and Smokey and the Bandit, and they gave it to Burt Reynolds. He sang the part on the soundtrack album. So when Isaac Hayes got a part in Chuck Turner, this is my chance to show you I should have been Shaft. And Jonathan Kaplan directed Chuck Turner. He came from the Roger Corman School of Directors as well. And he got a job on the Exploitation movie called White Line Fever, which is a trucker film, simply because everybody thought Chuck Turner was a truck movie, even though Chuck Turner is the name of Isaac Hayes' character, which leads us to Dorinda, Nichelle Nichols' character, who is a female madam who runs a stable of women, and every other word out of her mouth is a profanity. And not just cursing for cursing's sake, it's poetry coming out of this woman's mouth. And if all you knew of her was Lieutenant Uhura, this movie will blow your mind. Now, Yaphet Kotto, Isaac Hayes, these are some big brothers. The scariest person in Chuck Turner is Nichelle Nichols. And you really think she might F Isaac Hayes up. So that's why it's rated R, because, oh my God, the profanity. I love it. That's one of my favorite Blaxploitation women performances ever, because you know what? I like powerful women. and you weren't going to cross Dorinda. And it's funny that her son played in the Learning Tree. Her son played Gordon Parks' character in the Learning Tree.
Yeah, I was going to end on. I was going to ask you about the Shaft TV show, but I'll end it on. I'll go back to Gordon Parks.
Okay.
John Cassavetes. John Cassavetes is a very legendary actor, director, producer in Hollywood.
Yes.
And in a lot of ways, I guess we kind of go back to the beginning. Kind of, if it wasn't for him, he kind of kicked things off with Gordon Parks.
Yeah.
When it comes to black directors.
Well, John Cassavetes, he made a good movie with Sydney years ago, and he also did, Shadows, and he put black people in his movies in the early days. And Cassavetes, he kind of pioneered this market of, I will make a movie like a Dirty Dozen, and I'll take the money from the Dirty Dozen to make the movie I want to make. A lot of people use that methodology. I'll make one movie for Hollywood, and I'll take the money I made from that movie and make a little independent pictures. Cassavetes made a cottage institution out of that. It's what he's most famous for. He was the one who set up the meeting with Gordon Parks and the head of Warner Brothers at the time to talk about adapting the book. Cassavetes told Parks, you should adapt your book, and you should go to Hollywood and write the screenplay and get somebody to direct it. I'll set up the meeting with you at Warner Brothers. He set up the meeting at Warner Brothers, and then John Cassavetes left, and then the guy kept offering Gordon Parks all these other positions to make, so he didn't have to pay 4 people. And Gordon Parks kept taking the pieces. So it did start with John Cassavetes making the meeting, and then Parks knew Cassavetes back from his photography days. Remember, Gordon Parks was a famous photographer for Life magazine. He was one of the co-founders of Essence. He did a lot of stuff, and then his son made Superfly. Don't forget, Gordon Parks Jr. made Superfly and Thomasine and Busrod. So Parks, without Cassavetes, Parks probably would not have had the balls to go and ask Warner Brothers anything. He probably wouldn't be able to get a meeting with Warner Brothers, despite the fact that he was a famous photographer. You know how they treated us. So Cassavetes did kind of kick it off, and then Parks made a very independent kind of film with The Learning Tree, for Warner Brothers. So we'll give Cassavetes his props for setting that up. I love giving credit where it is due, and I talk about that in the book, mentioning that that's how Parks got the job. He also mentions that in his book, Parks' own book about making The Learning Tree, that's how he got the assignment to do it. And again, he became the first black director in Hollywood because they didn't want to pay.
I guess which is end. They didn't want to pay. I guess again, I'll end with the Shaft TV show. So I didn't know there was a TV show. So I guess they were trying to do the same thing, like you have the Columbo McMillan and Wife on NBC. I guess maybe CBS was trying to do the same thing with because Kojak was on. There was that and Kojak. But what happened to the Shaft TV show?
So here's why Shaft TV show. CBS is doing weird things. They tried to put Blazing Saddles on television as a TV show too. Lou Gossett.
That was going to work.
Lou Gossett played the Cleavon Little part. It lasted 1 episode. Anyway, Shaft the TV show lasted 7 episodes because, like you said, Columbo was a big hit, and the makers of Columbo had done their own black detective, Tenafly, in '74. So when Shaft the TV show was going off the air, Tenafly was on the air, and that was created directly for television. But what they tried to do was adapt Shaft to put them on TV. Now, this is after the first 2 Shaft movies, Shaft and Shaft's Big Score. They can't take an R-rated character and put them on TV because you have to make them G-rated. And Shaft is anything but G-rated. He's a sex machine to all the chicks. And so Shaft becomes this kind of like neutered detective trying to help out people. Tony Curtis is in the most famous episode of the Shaft TV show. And Tony Curtis is the villain. He came to play, and Richard Roundtree and him have some great interplay together. And Willona from Good Times is also on 1 episode. But the show, for the most part, someone said, and I quoted them, they said, like a Shaft on TV made Barnaby Jones look like Eldridge Cleaver. And I said, I have to quote that book. Some black critics said this about the Shaft TV show. And he's right. It was neutered, but it lasted 7 episodes. And some of them are actually quite fascinating. And Richard Roundtree, let's give him the end on this because he just passed away. Richard Roundtree played the longest running black character in movie history. He played Shaft in any of those 2 lousy remakes. Well, 1 lousy remake, 1 terrible remake of Shaft. He's still John Shaft. And then the 3 movies he made, Shaft Speaks to Us, Shaft in Africa, Shaft. And then the 7 episodes he did on TV. So from 1971 until 2019, Shaft was a character played by Richard Roundtree. He is the longest running Black character on TV, in general. He may be the longest running actor to play the same character, period. I don't want to quote that without my research, but he is certainly the longest running Black character, it's actor to play the same Black character. Sidney Poitier, he also was the second Black character to have a trilogy. Sidney Poitier was the first one with Virgil Tibbs. In the Heat of the Night, the organization, they call him Mr. Tibbs. So little history there. But Richard Roundtree, again, who just passed away recently, he made history. He was the longest running Black character continuously.
All right, that's a good place to start with Richard Roundtree from Shaft. If you're interested, we talked a lot, but there's a lot more in this book. Black Caesars and Foxy Brown, A History of Blaxploitation Cinema. Odie Henderson, thank you very much. If people want to check you out, where can they go?
Well, I'm on the gram and I'm on Blue Sky, and I got off Twitter. I need to get off of there. You can find me easily on Instagram and on Threads, OdieNader2. I'm on Blue Sky, OdieNader. Also, I am the film critic of the Boston Globe, the chief film critic of the Boston Globe. Let's add that chief. Give me my props here. And so you can find me there too. I'm easy to find. I'm not hiding. I should be.
And if people are interested, say they want to be a film critic, what advice would you give young folks if they want to be a film critic?
Do something else. No, I'm just kidding. Love movies. Love movies. There's so many critics that I've read hate movies. You can tell. You can tell I love movies, even when I'm panning a movie and shredding it. I love movies, and you have to love movies to be a film critic. If you're just a cynic and you hate things, or you're just a cynic, you just want to complain, you can. I don't review. I don't know, things that I don't like. Like, I mean, I love movies. I wouldn't want to be an opera critic because I don't like opera. I want to be a ballet critic because I took ballet as a kid. Now I hold a grudge against ballet for forever and ever. Amen. So I wouldn't want to get a job writing about something I didn't love. So I think that's the number one thing. Number one, love movies. Number two, do your homework, research, know something about the history of film. It's very, very important because nothing new under the sun. So many references in movies today have a predator. We'll go Melvin Van Peebles a quick second here. Spike Lee's famous shot, you know the one. You know who invented that shot? Melvin Van Peebles. If you watch the story of 3 Day Pass, watch it. There's a shot in the movie that is a double dolly shot. I call it the people mover shot, but it's called the correct term for it is a double dolly shot. Melvin Van Peebles did that in 1967. And Spike Lee knew that, and that's why he took it. It is Spike Lee's trademark. It belongs to Spike now, forever and ever, amen. But Melvin Van Peebles started it, and if you knew your history when you saw that shot, you knew where it came from. So that's important to know. And also write every day. And not every day. You don't have to write every day because that's BS. But write enough where you practice. I always say I'm a better writer than I was 20 years ago, but I'm not as good a writer as I'll be tomorrow. That's my advice for film critics. But number one, love. You have to love what you write about. You can't. Otherwise, it's just drudgery. Why would you want to do that? Because we don't get paid squat. I come from a tech background, and let me tell you, tech pays. Tech will make you put up with some stuff you don't want to put up with. Journalism, not the same. So you got to love what you do.
No, you got to
love it. You got to love it. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it at all, and you won't be any good.
Right. I mean, just real fast. Spike is a direct descendant of Melvin Van Peebles. I think you mentioned Bill Gunn too, but he is a direct.
Well, Spike remade Ganja and Hess.
For what film?
Sweet Blood of Jesus. Is literally, in fact, Bill Gunn is credited on the screenplay. No, Bill Gunn is an incredibly large influence on Spike Lee because Bill Gunn's movies are messy. And they have people talking over each other, and there's weird shots, and there's freaky deaky screwing, and there's weird endings. All that stuff comes from Bill Gunn. So Spike Lee wears his influences on his sleeve. He does not lie to you. Spike Lee Vincent Minnelli is one of Spike Lee's biggest influences. That opening scene with Malcolm X, where they're doing the zoot suits and they're walking down the street and it turns like a big dance number, that's straight out of the bandwagon. That's Vincent Minnelli. Spike Lee puts his influences on the screen, and if you know your history, remember Spike's a film professor, you know exactly where he's getting this stuff from. And he's not hiding it from you. Scorsese is the same thing. Scorsese never hides his influences. He puts them on the screen and says, guess where I got this from, people? And if you are a film historian, you know your movies, you look at it and you smile because you're like, hey, you know, you look at what Martin Scorsese is doing. Look what Spike's doing. And Spike, when they do interviews, they're open about this. Martin Scorsese, of course I stole that shot from this movie. Hell yes, I took it. Spike says the same thing. Of course I stole this shot. And because you know what? They're historians. They're film historians. They're lovers of film. And again, there's nothing new under the sun. So what you do is you take what was old and you make it yours. Like Chris Rock said, you're an old, you know what? So you knew what. The same thing with movies. And I think it's important. I keep harping on history and stuff like that. Not saying you have to go and have an encyclopedic knowledge of film history, but it's nice to know something. It's nice to see something that, you know, someone put into the movie on purpose for somebody like you to look up and catch. To me, that's one of the greatest things in movies for me is me catching a reference to something. And me thinking I'm the only one that caught it, which is not true. But, you know, at that moment, you feel like the filmmaker spoke to you.
All right. To end. Thanks a lot, Odie.
Thank you so much for this. This is a lot of fun. It's great to speak to folks. And I don't really get to ramble on with people of color, you know, not very much in this industry. I mean, it's only 6% black film critics, you know.
That's all.
Sad. 6%.
God, I said, I got this thing. Like in every, doesn't matter if it's nonprofits or it's ballet or whatever tech, it's 3 to 6.
I always want.
Oh my God!
You know, people always have that thing about they say that someone mistook them for the other black person at work. That's never happened to me. Because in tech, I was the only black person. So it was like no one ever mistook me. If you mistook me for somebody else I was working with, you was blind. I keep picking these professions where I wound up being the only spot on a Dalmatian. And I don't know why. This is just, I don't know. We need more critics of color, not just black film critics. We need more critics of color, period. Because our voices, we see different things. And our voices are important, not just for black things. I've written about Billy Wilder. I've written about silent movies, about 8.5. I've read about everything because I don't want to be pigeonholed. But at some point in time, having a black voice or a voice that's not your own or not the normal voice, the typical voice, can be interesting. Whether you agree with it or not, can be an interesting look at something else. I always go back and whenever there's something like a woman type movie that's really like things people saying is feminist or what have you, I go and read women critics because they're going to speak to it from that level. And when black movies, I try to find other black critics beside me and read what they say. Not that they're going to agree with me or that we're going to have the same opinion because we're not a monolith, but it's nice to kind of hear if they may have seen something I didn't see. Or they may have coming from a relationship or that I never had as a black person that they had, their black experience. Or even when they have LGBTQ movies, they go and read other critics who are queer, and see what they say. And I found it more fascinating than the typical straight white male film critic that's writing about this stuff that you hear, that their voices are prominent and dominant in this profession. And so when I did something where they had a journalist thing for high school kids in Boston, I went up to Boston and I represented the paper. I represented the film criticism part of the paper. And I talked to gay teenagers, the white teenagers, women, girl, female, male. I talked to black. And the black students came to me and said, I was the only person of color they spoke to in the entire freaking conference. And that it hurt my heart. But I told them, I said, if I'm an influence to you in any regard, at any time, look at me if you don't think that you can do this because there aren't any black people. I'm not. There's no magic. And, if I can do it, you can do it, is what I basically was saying to them. And they're going to tell you can't. Just like they told me I couldn't write code. I have a degree in math. Weird to be a writer with a degree in math, but I got one. They told me I couldn't do it. And asked my mother this question. Tell me I can't do something, that's like fuel. Just tell me I can't fly, that I know. You tell me I can't write a review or I can't be a programmer, oh, you create a monster. So I wanted to leave that message to, I'm speaking to anybody that wants to be a film critic, but especially critics of color and female critics. We're told not to do this, that we're not smart. All we know is Soul Plane and Medea. No disrespect to Medea. Maybe a little bit of disrespect to Medea. But,
a little bit. I'm usually like this.
Maybe that much. But it's funny because Black History Month just ended, right? And editors that have never worked with me have reached out to me and said, hey, you want to write about some Black stuff? That was offensive enough. But what's even more offensive is that I'd written the article they were asking me to write 15 years ago. I wrote it 15 years ago. I was so much ahead of them that I wrote this article a decade ago. And so they were asking me to write an article I'd already written about Blackness. No one writes me and says, hey, why don't you write about, Whit Stillman, who is the whitest director I can think of that Black people actually like. He made Metropolitan and Barcelona, Last Days of Disco. And for years, I've been wanting to write a piece on Whit Stillman. I even got Whit Stillman to endorse me to write a piece about him. I got the director to do it. Nobody would take it because I was Black. They said, why are you writing about the whitest director in the world? I'm like, for the most part, most of my childhood was filled with the whitest directors in the world because they know all those old movies were directed by Black people. Gordon Parks made a movie a year before I was born. He was the first Black director of Hollywood. Obviously, yes, Spencer Williams and Oscar Micheaux. But, that was a year before I was born. Okay, so I don't get that they look at us and they think that we only know ourselves. But to be honest with you, we know more about them than they know about themselves because we are forced to learn about this type of thing. And so they keep missing that. Gay people know more about straight people because they are forced into that world. White people have to come into our world and learn about us. But we have to go into their world every day and learn about them. And so what offends me so much is that your skin color or who you are or what gender you are is a hindrance to you, whereas no one's listening about what you actually know. And so that is the deterrent. I became a programmer because my mother told me they were not going to hire a Black film critic. I could have been a film critic 40 years ago. Not 40, but 37 years ago. When I graduated university at 90. I graduated high school at 86. So let's say 90, I could have been a professional film critic. Well, I could have gone to school for film criticism in 86 when I started university. My mother said, no one's going to hire you. You're Black. So I became a programmer. Granted, that was very, very good to me financially, eventually, but think about it. Like, I waited until 2022 to write for the newspaper. I've been wanting to write for the newspaper since I was 6 years old. So I was pulled away. I was told that I was not supposed to do this. I wrote anyway, but I wrote for myself and I wrote for like my little websites and so on. But think about it. I could have done this earlier. I'd probably be out of work and living in a trash can like Oscar right now because all the papers folded. But I was dissuaded from this so many years ago, not knowing that I knew who Armin White was, that Elvis Mitchell was there, that Gene Seymour was there. There were Black critics. There weren't a lot of them, but there were a couple. But I was sent on a different path, and I look back on it and there's a good and bad to it. But I really feel like today, I see a lot of people of color being sent the same direction I was being sent, away from what their true passion is. And so I preach this gospel to them whenever I can. And I tell them it's not going to be easy, but, being Black ain't easy, no matter what you're doing. So just add this to your, portfolio of things that irritate you. But it hurts me when these kids were coming to me saying that they didn't see any influence but me, and it kind of pissed me off because it was this giant journalism conference, and I ain't the only Black person, right? There's plenty of Black folks at the Globe. They're not doing what I'm doing, but they're writers, And so I think we don't see enough of it, and I think that dissuades the next Roger Ebert from existing. So I mean, that's my little soapbox diatribe here. Sorry.
Well, we inspired a whole new generation of writers of color because we need it. We need
Come
it.
on, folks.
Different voices are always good.
Come on, so I can get out of this profession. Come get me. Take me. I need to retire.
Help this man. He wants to sit on an island and just watch movies in peace.
I would have stood on the island and watched movies in peace. I've been a professional film critic since 2006. So, I wrote for Roger's site. Roger hired me. I owe having my idol be my mentor is something that is blessed. I was blessed in that regard to have Roger for the 3 years that he was alive after he hired me to kind of mentor me as a writer. But he wasn't the only mentor I had, but certainly the most famous one I've had at this point.
What was he like?
He
gave
me the best piece of advice I ever had as a writer. And it's going to sound very, very simple when I tell you what it is. But, that first piece I wrote for Roger, it was and this is what I love, that Roger assigned me things that weren't because I was Black. He said, I want Odie to write about these documentary about raccoons. The best person to write about documentary raccoons is Odie. He's to make it interesting. Like, Roger, what the hell do I know about raccoons? But the first piece I wrote for him, it was a documentary called Sleep Furiously. It was a documentary about a little library van in this town in Wales. And the guy drove around the library van and gave books out to this like dying village. And it was I enjoyed it. It was very weird and avant-garde, but I enjoyed it. And the review took me 9 hours to write. Normally I can turn a review out in an hour. But I was so afraid to write that first review for Roger's site. He was going to hate me and I was going to be the worst writer in the world. And I was going to be grand opening, grand closing. I was going to write this reviews and say, I hate it. He's going to fire me. So he ran the review. And so I wrote him after this. I said, listen, I take direction very well. So can you please tell me how to write for your site? Because I can't go through this agony again. I got a job. I have a day job. I can't be sitting up till 4 o'clock in the morning worrying about this. And he wrote back one sentence. And that one sentence was, I want you to write like Odie Henderson. And that sounds really simple when you think about it. But when you spend your entire life being told you have to sound like everybody else, it's a very, very big deal. And that's what Roger was. Roger was a very nurturing mentor to a group of writers. I don't think you'll find a writer that was under his auspices who would say that he was not that. He was a very generous person. He wanted you to be the best that you could possibly be. And that's something in a mentor. And he could give you tough love when needed, but for the most part was there to kind of, say, you need to write like you. That is the best advice to any writer, not just to me. Don't write like Odie Henderson and everybody else because I'll sue you. But no, that whole premise of be yourself is something that if you go to journalism school, that's the thing they tell you not to do. Mm-hmm. So maybe in hindsight, my luck of my mother forcing me to do something else gave me my voice. Because maybe if I had gone to school, they would have erased it from me and I would not have been confident enough to write in my voice. And Roger just put the period at the end of the sentence for me. When he said that, and he created a monster. Because I was like, I'm going to sound like me. And it's funny, people, when they talk to me, they say, you sound like you do on paper. And I think that may be the greatest thing any writer could ever hear because they know it's me. We can read 2 sentences and we know it's you. And I'm like, I didn't want that. I fought that. I'm like, why? I went to Matt Seitz, my other mentor, and I'm like, I don't want to sound like me. I want to sound like everybody else. He's like, you're the dumbest fool I've ever met. You know how many writers would kill for people to say, this sounds like you? You see a Spike Lee movie, you know it's Spike, right? You see Martin Scorsese movie, you see a couple of scenes, you know he directed it. You don't have to even see the credit. There's something to be said for that, that. But it had to be beaten into me because it had been beaten out of me. I think it's even worse for people of color because they really beat it out of you then, So it's kind of, I'm blessed in the regard that I like Monique said, I kind of took my ass whipping, so maybe the next person doesn't have to take those whippings that I took. So,
Right.
And people taking ass whipping say I didn't have to take them either. So I want to honor the ancestors in that regard. And I'm very serious about that.
I think you did a really good job.
Well, thank you.
Mr. Henderson, thank you very much. People, check him out at the Boston Globe. Grab this fantastic book, and thank you for the words of wisdom.
Thank you so much.